The Biden-Harris administration's best chance here is to, first of all, just be explicit about talking about African-American issues. Don't call them urban issues, right? Don't call them challenges in the heartland of America. These are Black issues, and also frame them in a way that makes everyone understand that the challenges that Black folk face are challenges that America must address as a whole. Hi, I'm Dr. Ravi Perry. I'm chair and professor in the Department of Political Science at Howard University. We've got to remember and just be blunt about the fact that Black issues in America at the national level will always need coalitions with other groups, mainly with whites, to be very explicit here, in order to get that stuff done. By explicitly talking about racial appeals, but convincing whites that this is in their interest too. It's a theory that I have called universalizing the interests of African Americans as interests that matter to everyone. That if we write this bill that primarily perhaps targets African Americans, but that it also has significant impact for everybody else. To the extent that the Biden-Harris administration understands the power of their rhetoric and is willing to work with all kinds of groups throughout the country to ensure that African American interests remain at the forefront of their agenda, that's important. They need to start by focusing on the core issues that surveys have indicated Black folks care about, which includes education, criminal justice, economic issues, and of course, healthcare. We need to see first the appointments of competent, intelligent people that follow science and data. That's what's necessary most immediately. And then secondly, we need to ensure that the policies and programs that each of those divisions do target African Americans specifically. So if it's about healthcare, for example, it's not just about saving Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. It's about amending it to make sure that Black folks in rural areas get access to care. If you're someone like me who's Black and living with HIV, right? You want people who have multiple identities. You can't just have it be affordable. You have to be able to actually access it and get it. With the change of power in the U.S. Senate is the appointment of federal judges that will understand and apply the law in a way that treats African Americans fairly. And that means, one, appointing people who provide more descriptive representation of Black folks. To be clear, we can look at someone like Clarence Thomas, and I would certainly argue that that is not someone who's representative of African American interests. But in most cases, if you share the experience, because you live it, you are more likely to, in a legal context, to then apply the law equitably and appropriately. If you're trying to litigate or relitigate some of the past atrocities as it relates to civil rights, even more recently, Black Lives Matter protests, to give people the appropriate kinds of legal representation and to litigate those cases that have not been litigated well to the point where, for example, any officers have been held accountable. Those are just some examples of what we need to see there in criminal justice. Black and ethnic studies kinds of courses can and should be required. And if any reason that we needed to convince us of that should have been the Capitol insurrection, where we all know very clearly that had those people been Black or brown, it would have been a bloodbath. It would have never made it up the steps. And it would have been a completely different scenario than what it in fact was. That tells you everything you need to know, that we need to be teaching about these things early, because, not just for African Americans, to be clear, because Black history is not just for Black people, it's American history. And we need to ensure that that history is incorporated in all of our public schools so that people have the skills to know what they need to know to maximize their power. We have seen such volatility in the African American community. There is not a significant level of upward mobility that's been happening, even for those who are, for example, lower to middle class. Many of them are in stagnant positions where wages are not increasing. There's a horrible sexist gender gap that still exists that needs to be closed immediately. So those are the kinds of job opportunities and pay scale opportunities that we should really be focusing on and changing as soon as we can. For far too long, for far too many presidential administrations, the quote unquote agenda that Black folks have gotten written up about by so-called leaders, mad respect for all of them, but we have to be more inclusive to ensure that it does speak to trans issues, that it does speak to disability issues, right? That it does speak to Black immigrant issues. And so we need to have certainly a national discussion about Black intersectionality. And I think that if the Biden-Harris administration puts out a memo, puts out an agenda, perhaps appropriately for your Black History Month, that says these are our core issues that we're going to be focusing on, even if it's just for the first 100 days. So you make it clear that people know that this is a priority.